It doesn't look like something that should be in fresh water. It looks like a cross between a swordfish and a trout. And then you see this thing that's iridescent and shining the way it does, and it just makes you look at everything around you in a different way.
If you were to come across a grayling for the first time and look at that, and if you look at that dorsal fin, it's like nothing you've ever seen before. They're part and parcel of the experience of the Centennial Valley. So if we lost them, we'd be losing part of the valley.
I came here in the fall of 2008, and the staff had been writing a comprehensive conservation plan. Part of what was in that plan was to add Arctic grayling conservation at a level that it hadn't been in the past.
In the lower 48, there were only 2 Arctic grayling populations after the last glaciation. One was in Michigan, that one's extinct, and one was in the upper headwaters of the Missouri River. So those remnant populations are glacial relic populations, which means that they were separated from grayling that exists in the northern latitudes.
Grayling in Montana had been petitioned to be listed under the Endangered Species Act, so that sort of uncertainty loomed over everything.
The animosity between agencies was high. There was tremendous disagreement on what was driving the grayling population and how best to fix it.
We sat down and talked about what we wanted to do as individual agencies to start to better conserve grayling. What became apparent really quickly is we were in the same camps that people were in 40 years ago. We sort of took a step back and said, rather than debating about these individual ideas, let's test them all. We'll let grayling and their population response decide which is the best management approach going forward.
Over the 80 years, 3 hypotheses kept being put forward.
We thought grayling numbers were being challenged by competition from hybrid cutthroat rainbow trout.
Another limiting factor was spawning habitat in the streams. Whether it was because of land use or natural factors, grayling may not have adequate amounts or high enough quality spawning habitat.
Another leading idea was winter habitat. These fish migrate upstreams to spawn, then migrate back to Upper Red Rock Lake to winter. It's a large natural lake, but it's shallow. And so when you have a hard winter, you can have anoxic, low oxygen conditions, and the fish die.
There was information that both supported and refuted each idea.
We had an idea of how we could test those concurrently, and it would just take all of us to get it done.
The adaptive management plan is really just a way to test different management alternatives. That's it, in its simplest form. They're described in different ways: hypotheses, limiting factors. But at the end of the day, we're just sequentially implementing different management actions, looking at the population response, and then implementing other management actions to ultimately decide how we can most effectively manage.
Adaptive management ultimately is agreeing to disagree and being willing to test competing ideas at the same time with the same project.
And the rest of us just tried to help in any way we could. But when they get into the deep mathematics, it's got to go back to Jeff and Matt.
Matt and I literally spent a week for each model. We had to go through that process of thinking about the mechanisms that were behind those hypotheses, collect the data, the biological information, all the historical information, and then building a model that could take the data we collected and spit out a prediction.
We then compare the number of grayling that showed up to each model's prediction to understand which one is probably most accurately influencing grayling. For cutthroat trout, what we wanted to do was see how many grayling would be in the population at a high level of cutthroat trout, but also kind of a medium and a low level. And in order to do that, we needed to suppress a population in a short amount of time. What we did was set up a weir and culled cutthroat from the population as they came up during the spawning run. We also called on the anglers.
By the second year, the word was out. We went from 1 or 2 vehicles to 30 vehicles parked in one place and 3 people per vehicle. And potentially everybody coming back with 10 or 20 fish, all of which are over 3 pounds. People had a lot of fun.
Things were going along nicely. We were reducing the number of cutthroat trout. We were collecting really good data, but we weren't just collecting data for cutthroat trout. We concurrently collect data for all of our hypotheses.
The second test was to start looking at whether or not the fish have access to adequate amounts of stream habitat.
What we did was take advantage of a natural fragmenter of habitat, beavers. So we're going to work the end of this beaver dam and just make a bigger notch, make sure grayling can get up and get to where they want to spawn. They had built over 50 dams in Red Rock Creek and essentially made habitat that was upstream of those unavailable to fish. We notched those dams in the course of a year in order to make many, many, many more meters of habitat available to fish.
There's no way I could help those 2 guys with the mathematics or the models, but I have a keen interest in history. Some of the stuff in archival information really got me to thinking that the story hadn't been fully fleshed out. 6 anglers caught fully 1,000 grayling in one day. We determined that the route the fish had taken to get to that spring head had been altered by duck hunters in 1908. And we had seen in Google Earth photos areas of a very curvy, sinuous river just going straight as an arrow. It seemed odd. Maybe we just needed to figure out how to put the landscape back to the way it was in the late 1800s. Our colleagues who were explosives experts had it all put together, and then time came, and it was 4, 3, 2, 1. Almost immediately, the stream reconnected to the historic channel and left the channel that had been created by the duck hunters 100 years before. There was a lot of happiness that the project had gone well, but until the fish told us it was a success, it really wasn't a success. It was just a story about an explosion.
Going into the winter of 2015-16, we had had 4 years of cutthroat removal at that point. So the competition model was predicting a fantastic spawning run coming in 2016 for grayling. But the winter habitat model predicted a population crash.
I actually remember real specifically in 2016, it was a cold, wet day. Matt Yeager was there to do his surveys. We had expected the grayling to be there by then. We had not caught many in the trap, and his surveys didn't find many grayling fish either.
It was really what the winter habitat model predicted. Our grayling population had declined fivefold.
And that was hard to take.
The bad winter and population decline were undeniably a bad thing for grayling, but they were a great thing for learning. I think that was one of the first times that Jeff and I looked at each other and said, holy smokes, this is gonna work.
Learning that winter habitat, maybe the limiting factor, is in a lot of ways positive. It helps us understand what we need to do moving forward to ensure that grayling stay in this valley.
As the project leader of a national wildlife refuge, my job is to try to conserve the wildlife that are native here and try to recover those that are struggling, and lead a staff to figure out how to do that best. I was just in my office and I got a text from Jason, and he had a picture connected to it.
There's a lot of trout. Yeah!
H1 grayling.
He explained that they had caught a grayling in the spring head, and this was him. It actually took me a little bit to really understand this is what we'd been looking for. This is what we were hoping for. And this hadn't happened in a long time. This adaptive management has brought to the table history, science, on-the-ground management, different agencies, and problem solving at a level that transcends careers. I think the future for grayling here is bright because we're on the right track. We're looking at all aspects. We have all these hypotheses and these models. 1,000 grayling coming up Red Rock Creek will someday not just be a goal, it'll be something we can accomplish with relative confidence each year.
My first notice of the eel starting to go downhill was 1972 at Cougar Canyon Bridge in South Fork of the Salmon River. I was down there salmon fishing. One lone eel came up through the sands. Coming upstream, I could see him in the sand. I watched him way down, maybe an eighth of a mile away. I seen him. He came up, swam under the bridge. I followed him for another half mile or so, not knowing why. He disappeared into the deep water. That was the end of my journey with him. But when I got back to camp, I thought about this, and I thought about it. And I wondered why the Creator showed me that one lone eel. And it dawned on me why. I always wondered, did I see the last one in the South Fork of the Salmon River?
When the world was created, and they said that I will give my body for the people that are going to be placed here after us. They gave themselves up so that we could live on this world.
Spiritually, he's one of us.
People would go, oh yeah, I remember seeing, there used to be so many lamprey in the Umatilla that they would literally plug up diversion screens. There was just so many of them.
Well, I mean, I don't know if you ever heard the story of how Lamprey, the eel, got his name, or how it became his name. You never heard the story, the creation story. Creation story is this, Lamprey was a gambler, okay? He was a gambler.
Lampreys are prehistoric creatures. They lack true jaws.
And Coyote was the creator, so Coyote, he's going about his business. He's along the river there, and here's Lamprey. He's down the eel. He's down there, and he's been talking to beaver and the muskrat.
They're actually don't have any bones. They have a little cartilage up in their head and their nasal area.
Coyotes, what's going on? Well, Lamprey, eel's down there. He's playing the stick game, bone game. He's beating everybody.
They're very strong. I mean, if you can get your hand on this thing, I mean, they're solid muscle.
So Coyote walks down to the bank and says, what's going on? How can I play? Let me play you, eel. Eel says, all right.
Tribal members knew them as cleaners of the streams. They burrow down, and when they're juveniles, they're filter feeders.
So Coyote beats him first round, taking his stuff. And he beats him again. So now Eel's sitting there and he has no possessions. He has nothing no more to gamble with.
And so they'd actually orientate themselves as an ammoseat and face upstream, and they had this oral hood that would open up.
He says, well, one more game, Coyote, one more. So Coyote asked him, well, what are you going to bet with? He said, well, I'm going to bet you my arm that I'm going to beat you finally.
Then as adults, they're finding a host out in the ocean, and they're sucking onto that host.
Coyote plays him again and beats him. So this time, he says, I'm going to beat you this time, Coyote. I'm going to gamble you my leg.
Their tongue is very raspy, and it serves as a mechanism to burrow into prey and to attach to prey for feeding.
Now Lamprey's sitting there with no arms and no legs, right? So Coyote looks at him and says, you have nothing to gamble with no more. Kicked him into the river. And because your mouth got you in trouble, now that's what you're going to suck onto the rocks with. That's a coyote. That's how Lamprey was created, and that's why he's in the river and sucks onto the rocks.
See how you can just suck right onto there. So it enables them to negotiate those structures such as falls and stuff like that, cascades that might limit the distribution of salmon. Lamprey climb up and over some of that stuff. These fish, you know, obviously their design works for them as they've been around and they've looked like this for so long. And yeah, they're definitely prehistoric creatures. When I was doing my initial literature review and just going out and trying to find information about lamprey, I learned that in talking through my oral history interviews with tribal members, I learned that this river, you know, was poisoned in '67 and 1974. 85 and 90 miles of this river. Tribal members told me that they literally saw, even in this section that we're in right through here, literally thousands of lamprey dead along the banks, and it stretched for miles. And the whole reason that, from my understanding, was because they were worried about non-game fish impacting fish that they could sell tags and generate revenue for. Lamprey were usually lumped in this category of other fish or trash fish. People didn't really understand the connection the tribes had with lamprey.
People need to understand what the lamprey is. He is a fish that belongs to this river system. He's been native to this river system, so he belongs here. And so this river system needs him. That's the bottom line.
I really tie the fish poisoning effort that went on here in the 60s and 70s for the exact reason why we had such a sharp decline of lamprey in the Umatilla. There's no harvest here in the Umatilla River and hasn't been since the 1970s. You know, it's been 40 years since we've seen a harvest here in this basin. The tribes used to harvest lamprey in their respective areas, you know, and because of the way the decline's going, we've lost those harvest opportunities in the tributaries. Of course, the major fishing site for the tribes was Celilo Falls, and that was inundated with the construction of the Dalles Dam. So we're now forced to go to our mainstay, our only place that we can really go is Willamette Falls to get any kind of numbers of lamprey. There's only a few of us that really get to go down there and harvest at Willamette right now, but we're down there harvesting for our community, so we can have that reconnection with our culture and our heritage and the spirit of the lamprey. These fish play an important role, you know, and not just to the ecosystem, but play an important role in our life and our culture. They're involved in our ceremonies at the Longhouse. They're considered one of our first foods. You know, they've always been part of our heritage and the promise that we made as tribal people to take care of these fish. You know, they sacrifice themselves for our well-being, and we've made a promise that you know, as long as they're around, we would work to protect them. You know, and we're really concerned right now because lamprey populations are in decline. You know, and so I feel like, you know, we're not living up to our end of the bargain in taking care of these fish. It's something that's people my age really don't understand because they haven't always been around, and it's people that are, you know, generations that are ahead of me and that are older than me that understand their importance.
In our religious ceremonies, sometimes we have them, sometimes we don't. When we don't have them, we miss them. And the older people, older than me, They ask, why don't we have a swim? Well, we didn't get any this year. They didn't come up enough to harvest enough to have some for the ceremonies. And there are times that I worry that I would sure hate to see the extinction of lamprey in my lifetime. They've been here for hundreds of millions of years.
Think about, the huge geological events that they've survived. These things are just so old, and to think that they've, survived that long.
But it's only going to take 100 years to wipe them out.
It's just the whole being of the animal himself. How do we let something that's 450, 500 million years old go extinct? Shame on us, the whole bunch of us, for not paying attention to what was going on.
I think that a lot of times we put a price on everything, and it's the price that we put on our resources that drives the plan as whether we're going to protect it or not protect it. Our people believe that everything is connected, and whatever happens to one form of life will affect the other forms of life.
People better realize what they're doing, because we are a big family. We are the circle. That's what life is about. We take care of one another. So when we have someone in trouble, that's where the rest of us have to step in.
We got eels, boys. Okay.
6.
6. 7. 8.
Lamprey were once very abundant in the entire Columbia Basin and tributaries of the Columbia Basin. Their range extended all the way up into the headwaters of the Columbia, all the way in the upper Snake Basin. Now lamprey are only really present in the mid-Columbia and the lower Columbia River, and it's really tied to passage through the dams. It's disheartening to understand, and to realize that I've got to go down to the main stem Columbia River and get my hands on these fish. They're not going to return here to the Umatilla on their own. I've actually got to go down there and pick these fish out of a fishway and take them, on the highway to get them up past these facilities. So it's frustrating in that aspect that that's what we've come to. Something that's older than anything else that's out there, that has this very important role ecologically and culturally. And here you see all this work that's going on for salmon. It's like, wow, we're spending millions and millions of dollars and ignoring lamprey. It drives the message home that the tribes are going to have to be in the driver's seat on this stuff. We're going to have to be the ones making the rubber meet the road. This is a stopgap measure to continue the perpetuation of a species that has been here since time immemorial. I mean, it's been here forever, and we'll do what it takes to ensure the continued existence of this important species.
Dire situations call for dire answers. That's basically all we're trying to do here, is trying to expand upon our knowledge on what we learned in the salmon world, can we take that over into the lamprey world?
There's a lot of things to understand yet about lamprey behavior, their characteristics, just their overall biology that we're still trying to get a grasp on.
It's not just one problem, it's several within the life history of lamprey.
The tribes have raised the awareness level, the importance of this fish, that people are starting to understand, hey, maybe there is a connection, with salmon recovery and a healthy stream that includes lamprey. It's lessons learned, and it's like, what are we learning about this fish so we can continue to move forward with, recovery. That's the ultimate goal here.
They amaze me. They are amazing creatures. They just, my brother eel's cool. He just flat cool. And when I lift this up, you take a good look at his body. This is one of the things that always amazes me. How they can swim straight backwards, I don't know. I can't figure it out. But that's not for me to know. Okay? It's just one of those things. This is the Nez Tribal Hatchery. These are the holding tanks that we use. We're right in the middle of the Nez Reservation, and this is where we bring eel. That's my way to allow to I got that. I talked to him. I was telling him good morning. Asked him how he was. Okay? You want to see him? There he is. There he is. You want to meet my friend? He's looking right at you. Right now, what we have going with the Nez Persons, we started about 6 years ago. We started what we called a translocation program. A lot of people call it low budget. Myself personally, I call it no budget because we don't have one. We'll go to the dams. We pick the eels up. We pick them up, take them inland where our home country is, about 300 miles away, put them in the tribal hatchery. At the end of May, we put them in tanks. We take them to the streams we want. And our rendition of that is not a restoration program. That's to keep alive what is there. There's 40 eels in there. And they're headed for the South Fork of the Salmon down to Cougar Canyon area. And that's where they'll be put into the water. Then it's up to them to do their thing. We've done our part. That's as far as we can take them. And it's always a great pleasure for me to make this part of the journey with the animals. But I can only go so far on their trail. Then it's up to them. In 1972, down on that far end is where I seen an eel coming up the river, and I followed him clear on up to the cut bank up there, and he went into the dark, and that was him telling me it's time for me to leave. I followed him as far as he wanted me to. But then after I thought about it, what it was all about, it was someone talking to me saying, we got a problem. And that was the last eel I've seen in here. And that was in 1972. So the significant part of it for me is after 40 years, I finally get to bring some of his family back and put them into this stream, which means a lot to me because they belong here. It's been a long journey, it's been a long battle. Back when this started, I knew if I said anything, all they would have done was throw me in the bucket as being a rowdy Indian. So we've came a long ways.
The whole idea of this is for Lamprey to come full circle, you know, and not just the Umatilla River, but the Columbia Basin, and not just the Columbia Basin, their entire range. And we're getting those fish and we're placing them right in this prime spawning habitat. We've been out planting lamprey here since 2000. We've been monitoring adult returns. Every year we'd see about 5, 10, maybe 15 adult lamprey return. And this year we had 129 lamprey return in the Umatilla River. It gives us a sense of hope that this might be possible, you know, that we might be going down the right road here to bring lamprey back. We're working to provide passage structures for lamprey to be able to make it up over the system, so eventually, you know, hopefully these fish can survive on their own and they don't need us going down to the main stem dam. You know, they'll be able to make those treks on their own. Improvements that we're making here in the Umatilla and improvements that other tribes are doing in other basins in the Columbia, you know, may not be things, you know, that we get to see the benefit of, you know, in our lifetime. I'm working for generations after me. You know, and hopefully my kids' kids or their grandkids will be able to, you know, harvest lamprey here in the Umatilla again at some point.
It's a milestone for me because it's just a beginning.
When you start talking about national parks and what makes them special, you can pick anyone in the country. There's always a few things that stand out. And when you come to the Smokies and you see these beautiful mountains, you see bears, salamanders, and when you get in our streams, you'll see fish too, real diverse spawn of fish. And you know, there's nothing quite as cool than jewel we call the Southern Appalachian brook trout. Part of the fabric of these mountains, just like all the other species that live here. And so those fish are special in the sense that they've been here for millions of years. They're fun to go explore where they're at because typically they're found in these mid to high elevation places that are fairly remote, not many people get to see. The males get these vivid colors in their fins, bright oranges and reds, and really striking color patterns on their sides, and they almost look surreal. But you know, there's not many places left in our southeastern United States you can find them. And the Great Smoky Mountains is one of the last strongholds. Along with, say, western North Carolina, we probably have the largest populations of southern Appalachian brook trout anywhere in the world. You know, one time before the park was established, before European settlers really got here and settled these areas, you know, brook trout were the only native trout species found in these mountains. But, you know, they're not there because they've been pushed out. They've been eliminated from a lot of those places through logging and non-native fish species. But these mountains have been healing for decades, and now we're just getting to the point where there is a lot of opportunity. It's really a neat time to be working in the field of fisheries and fish restoration, and we're trying to do our part here in the park with our species.
Nice, healthy brook trout.
The mission of the national park is to protect and preserve our native species, and it's something the Park Service takes very serious. Southern Appalachian brook trout have been extirpated or removed from 75% of the range here in the park alone. And so today we went over to North Carolina on the upper Little Tennessee River system, part of this same watershed, and collected about 300 plus or minus brook trout. And carried those fish out, put them in a truck, and trucked them over here to Anthony Creek, and carried them up in here and put them in throughout the restored stream section. That's significant in the sense that brook trout used to be throughout the headwaters of this Abrams Creek watershed. However, they've all been extirpated or eliminated. And so that was the first time probably that brook trout have been here probably since the 1950s or 60s. And so it's pretty cool to be able to put those fish back, be able to provide that opportunity for people to come in here and see those, future generations to come in here and catch those. It's another part of this ecosystem that we're able to put back to what it used to be and allow this ecosystem to kind of get back on track. Every little bit counts in terms of cleaning these ecosystems up. And so, you know, the Smokies is mostly a headwater park. And we feed the Little Tennessee system, the Pigeon River system, Little River system. And so we have to be good stewards of that and make sure that we're doing everything we can to pass it on as good or better than we found it. And hopefully over time, our neighbors are doing the same thing. And over time, the whole ecosystem improves downstream, little by little by little.
I try to stress the fact that this is the only species of trout that is native to Tennessee, that it's part of the Tennessee heritage. It's the fish that our great-great-grandfathers would have been fishing for. There wouldn't have been rainbow trout back then or brown trout to fish for. This was the trout. And I think it's important for even our grandkids to be able to have that opportunity. I don't think it says much about the society if we just let our past and our history just disappear.
Who's ready to stock some fish? I'm gonna move up that next riffle.
It's really sad to think about us losing the brook trout from an entire system like this. You're on a free-flowing, cold water stream This time of year, we have the beautiful trees, all in color, but it's just not the same. You can catch rainbow trout, you can catch brown trout, but you know, at least I know, a part of the ecosystem is not in place.
A lot of people think that rainbows and brown trout are naturally occurring fish, that they've always been here and they will always be here, but that's not the case in Tennessee. The only true native trout to Tennessee would be the southern Appalachian brook trout.
The brook trout was native to not only the small headwater streams, but also to these larger rivers. It's very special. We like to call it the jewel of the southern Appalachians. Unfortunately, because of activities that occurred back in the early 1900s, devastation logging, road building, and fire, the brook trout was almost eliminated from the southern Appalachians. And that's the reason why we have rainbow trout here, is once things started to recover, rainbow trout were being reproduced in large numbers in fish hatcheries, and it was very easy to bring those in and introduce them into the streams where the brook trout had existed. These days, the big challenge is that most of the good habitat for brook trout is occupied by rainbow trout, and you can't get the brook trout to displace the rainbows unless you help them out a little bit.
So we start evaluating, well, exactly what do we have? Where do we still have these native populations? Where were they originally? How much have we lost? How can we gain it back?
In order to ensure their survival, we decided we needed to take some very affirmative action and try to reestablish the brook trout in the streams where they had been. To do this, we set up a hatchery where we could bring the fish in and begin reproducing them in captivity.
They're there in their new home.
Hatcheries serve a lot of different functions, and being able to conserve a species is an important part of that. We're seeing some really good numbers. The fish are responding well. We're getting lots of eggs, and that's the goal. If we can take, 25 pairs of fish and end up with a couple thousand to stock, these streams, it doesn't take much to have a big impact. Most of these lands here that would be the home to brook trout are protected by the Forest Service. When they came in and started protecting this land and working to preserve what forest they could and regrow what forest had been cut, and once you started doing that, the land could start recovering, and we've gotten back to these pristine, clean, beautiful waters. These are the headwaters for a lot of people's drinking water. So if we have got these streams clean enough to support the brook trout, then that's a good indication that your water is starting out as clean as it can be.
But I appreciate all of y'all coming out today. It's the third year of the brook trout restoration project on Sycamore Creek. We've got the backcountry horsemen. They worked with us throughout this project. We've got volunteers from Trout Unlimited and some Boy Scout troops.
When we go to release the fish, of course, that's a very popular event for us. We get lots of people just coming out because it's really a cool thing to do.
And once we get the horses loaded up, we'll head in. We got one more, it'll go on the other horse, but we didn't put any.
Backcountry horsemen were able to load the fish onto their horses, haul them into the site.
All right, y'all ready? We're headed in.
And then we have just lots and lots of volunteers who are willing to haul the fish from the packs down to the stream.
Who's ready to stock some fish?
And spread them out and release them back into the stream.
And that's the ultimate goal, that not just in Tennessee, but throughout the south, the brook trout are returned to as much of their historic range as possible. They're absolutely gorgeous fish. All these beautiful colors of reds and greens and yellows and browns and golds. This time of year is perfect. Their underbelly matches the foliage, this bright orange with these white and black tips on their fins, and they're such a striking fish, and in this environment it's hard to beat.
They're just a spectacular fish. Really like to fish for brook trout, but oftentimes I find myself, instead of fishing, just watching them.
If you put the sneak on, you can oftentimes catch the fish doing their mating rituals where you have the males trying to court the females, and the females have fanned out all of the debris on these gravel where they're going to spawn. Then this courtship takes place between the two fish, swimming alongside each other, and it continues the cycle.
This is a long-term restoration effort to bring the brook trout back.
We're hoping we'll be to a point where these fish will start repopulating the stream on their own, and then we can start looking at other streams and expanding the brook trout back through its historic range.
The ecosystem would benefit from restoring back to nature what was originally there.
You know, you can drive down a road, you can even float down a river, and you really miss these kind of habitats. Oftentimes they have, you know, little riparian forests around them that kind of protect them from view, and they're kind of forgotten. No one kayaks down a swamp. So I think it's easy to look at one of these habitats and think, oh, it's a swamp, it's a slough, it's a bog, just some mud hole. Well, this is actually, we're in part of the river right now. And this is part of the river network. When this floods up, you would think this is part of the river. As you start getting out there and you realize that these things have such diversity to them that they support a lot of life, support a lot of diversity of life. So in sloughs and swamps, Oregon chub were one of the most abundant species in the habitats. An Oregon chub is a small floodplain minnow. They're about 2 inches long. It's the only fish that's endemic to the Willamette River Basin. Endemic meaning it's the only place that it's found. A trap like that. Now that's mostly Oregon chub though. A couple hundred years ago, the Willamette Valley was very different than what we see today. The river would have meandered across the floodplain. It wouldn't have had one channel, but many channels. And as it moved naturally across the floodplain, it left behind lots of remnants. Sloughs, swamps, oxbow lakes. These are the kind of places where Oregon chub would have done really well. Jump forward to today. The valley, instead of having many channels, we now have one single channel in most places. A lot of the swamps, the sloughs, the oxbow lakes have been filled in, either for agriculture or they've been cut off from the floodplain by roads and development. On top of that, a number of dams were built to contain high flows. Those flows, those high flow events that at one point flooded the whole valley bottom were the kind of flows we needed to actually let the river meander and change course through the Willamette Valley. And those were the flows that were required to actually create new habitats. So the Willamette River went from being a very wild river with high floods to being tamed. And during that time period, no one really thinking about what's happening to some of these species that were obligate to these habitats, that only lived in these habitats. When researchers went out to check on Oregon chub populations, especially in the main stem river where they were dominant, all those populations were gone. Those Oregon chub populations were replaced by non-native fish species. And they started raising the alarm, saying there might be a problem here. Oregon chub were listed as endangered in 1993. Good condition, its body's thick. And the focus on the early steps of our recovery were protecting the populations we had left. And we also started an introduction program for Oregon chub, basically backing up these populations. Anybody who's driven through the Willamette Valley knows this is an agricultural landscape. To do conservation of Oregon chub meant going into privately owned land.
Beautiful baby hive. It's just about needing more space.
I'm Karen Finley.
And I'm Tad Buford. And we are the owner-operators of Queen Bee Honey Company.
Besides the bees that we have here on the farm, we run hives for both pollination and honey production all around.
As biologists by training, we see that one of the big problems with beekeeping is the simplification of the landscape. Because Oregon chub was coming into everybody's attention, they were looking for places to restore it, and this little draw right here was ideal because there were no non-native predatory species here.
Lots of fish.
They did an excellent job installing the pond.
They took care of all the details behind the scenes, and when we had control about what they did and where they did it, but we never really had a lot of effort that we had to put into it.
It was quickly finished, and then one season it started growing in, and it's just been growing ever since then.
It's beautiful, and it brings in a lot of birds as well. So it adds a lot of life to the place.
There are ducks on this pond all winter.
Uh-huh.
And there'll be wood ducks, little hatch-out babies we'll see down there every year.
They're beautiful little fish. I love knowing that they're in there, and I like knowing the story behind them. They're kind of connecting us with the creek, and I'm happy to know they're there.
It's been really important that we have had Oregon chub populations established remotely in some very safe areas, and numbers and genetic diversity built up and strengthened. At the same time, it's been critically important that we've been able to secure and enhance and restore some of these areas that used to be a part of the Willamette's living river system. So when the Trust first acquired Green Island, it was pretty daunting to look at the restoration of nearly 1,000 acres of habitat. And the majority of the acreage was still active farmland. That transition over the last now 13 years, from trees planted in the ground to native forests growing, from a dike that had held the river at bay being removed to watching the water come back into some of those sloughs that had been waiting and just hadn't seen water for a long time. So we're getting to the point where some of those earliest trees are now 30 and 40 feet tall.
Mosquito fish. Little bluegill.
Yeah. But if I came out here and expected to see an Oregon chub every time we ran a seine through a side channel, I'd be sorely disappointed. But we know that we're creating space for them. As more fish get into the system and disperse within the system, they act as sources for each other, that fish can move back and forth. In a place like this, we'll see a handful of chub every year. And we think that, yeah, they're probably getting moved out while other ones get moved in year to year. And when they come through, it's going to be good because they're going to find places to be.
Looking good.
We are here today to announce the official final delisting of the Oregon chub. The Oregon chub is the first fish ever to be delisted from the Endangered Species Act.
After 2 decades of recovering Oregon chub, it was pretty exciting when we started kind of crunching the numbers and we were going through the data, realizing that we had met our recovery goals for Oregon chub. I think the Oregon chub recovery story is a great story to share, to celebrate. And we have a lot of momentum that's behind this Oregon chub kind of movement that we want to make sure is maintained. But just because Oregon chub aren't endangered anymore doesn't mean we aren't still helping them. The Endangered Species Act is oftentimes referred to like the emergency room in a hospital. But it doesn't mean that once you're able to leave the emergency room that you don't still need to have regular care. So Oregon chub aren't at the critical state that they once were. But there's still frontiers for us in the recovery of the species. There's still things that we're working towards to see that Oregon chub will persist well into the future. See what these little guys are doing. Good. So I'm gonna take care, guys.
For us, it means another species that can survive. We can help the Oregon chub survive. It goes with our whole idea of preserving the little bit of land we have to be Willamette Valley. And these fish are part of it.
Just trying to get those little elements all put together to have a bigger effect.
And now we have chub.
Now we have chub. A little bit at a time.
Okay, everybody ready?
We're ready. We've got like the handcuff.
So you could see them. Some of my ponds, like Nate Dunn's wetlands, in my short time working on the species, I've seen a major change in the way people look at their role in maintaining this ecosystem and this environment. It's not just Oregon chub. There's a lot of species that can use our help, and that a lot of us can do things to help these species out.
Here they come.
We've put a lot of building blocks in place, and we've put a lot of processes in place in these kind of upstream tributary habitats. We're starting to see some Oregon chub slowly kind of trickling down to the lower ends of these habitats. And I guess my long-term dream for the species is that when we find one out in a main stem habitat in the tributaries, that it's not a surprise.